Hello, everyone, for joining us for this very important conversation. And we are joined by Leon and his panel of guests. Leon, take over.
Yes, yes. Very good evening, everyone. My name is Leon Lidigu, an independent journalist currently in India. And before I start off, I just wish to thank all the panelists for making it today, for sparing your time for us today, because it's such a hectic time and we need to learn more from you. So thank you so much for being here with us today. So before I start anything else, I wish to give each of the panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves to us, to tell us who they are, what they're doing, where they are, and all of you are welcome. So as a gentleman, I'll start with the ladies, and I'll start from Madam Alicia. Kindly introduce yourself to us.
PM in
Alice,
Taiwan.
you have to start. You had muted. It starts from the beginning. You had muted yourself.
Okay. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Or hi to those who are in different time zones, because now I'm in Taiwan. It's actually 9 p.m. here. I hope you all are well and safe. And I am an independent journalist and currently based in Taiwan. I focus more on the refugees and the migrant issues. But of course, amid the virus outbreak, I also covered some pieces on the virus and how it impacted the more vulnerable populations. Thanks for having me. It's indeed an important topic to discuss this infodemic amid the global pandemic. Thanks.
Madam Catherine. Madam Catherine, are you with us?
Lecturer at Multimedia University of Kenya, and my main area is media studies, specifically broadcast media, with a keen interest in television and radio and now social media. Besides that, my studies center around audience studies. So I'm glad to be here and of course discussing a very pertinent issue, that of the global pandemic. And of course, journalists then are some of the groups of people who are on the front line in terms of reporting and, you know, guiding the public. So I'm grateful to be here and thankful that you invited me for this discussion.
Thank you so much. Madam Hope.
Hello, everyone. Mbori Hope Akoth. He is also an independent journalist. And yes, I'm glad to be here to be part of this great discussion. As we know very well that there's a lot that is going around. And at least
we are having a slight issue with your sound.
Yes.
We are having a slight issue.
Hello.
Hello. Come again.
Are you able to hear me?
Hope there's something wrong with your microphone.
Yes, yes.
Really, it's on. It's on.
Now you're fine. You're fine now.
Okay. Oh. Well, I'd say that I'm Mbori Hope Akoth, and I'm also an independent journalist. Yes, information is very vital, and pending to the pandemic that has held the whole world ransom, there's a lot of information that is being disseminated, which is not really right. And I'm glad to be part of this panel, you know, part of this group, to ensure that people get to know the right information that they deserve knowing, because I believe journalists are the mouthpiece of the people. Thank you so much and welcome.
Thank you. We go to Mr. Julius.
Yes. My name is Julius Mungu. I'm a journalist based in Rwanda. I specialize in business reporting, politics, sometimes technology. And I'm glad to join you today for this important discussion.
Thank you so much. And then the rest of the panelists, some of them are winding up on some engagements. They might or might not be able to join us, but we will proceed with everyone who is there. They might join us. If they join us, well and good. So, Mr. Julius, if I may start with you, for example, what is fake news? What is fake news? And what is the origin of fake news? Because many people are here, fake news, misinformation, disinformation. How do we distinguish these three?
Mm, mm. Well, let me perhaps start with a little bit of the background. Fake news, first of all, it's not a new concept. It's a concept that has been there for a very long time. Only that as the internet and technology continue to grow uh, very fast, with the emergence of social media and other networking sites, the internet has opened so many possibilities that people can share whatever they want, and so that has enabled or fueled the way people share information. And in that sense, that's why we saw what we call fake news taking another level more than what people knew. But this is a concept that has been there. Fake news would simply say it's sharing of information that is not true. In just to make it uh, understandable to every ordinary person out there. People do it for very many reasons. We could later on go into detail about that, but it's just simply the sharing of information that is wrong.
Thank you very much. And with regards to the infodemic that is happening, what is the situation in Rwanda?
Well, at least fake news really, like I said, with social media and internet, the world has become a global village. Rwanda is not an isolated country. It stands there alone. It's a country that is part of the global village. So whatever happens elsewhere affects Rwanda as well. That's why you see the coronavirus. Before, when you look at, for instance, 10 years ago or 20 years ago, let's take an example of the world or the global recession of 2008, 2009. Most of the countries in Africa, including Rwanda, were not affected because by that time, the world was not as interconnected as it is today. But now, because the world is so interconnected, we tend to see whether information, whether what happens elsewhere is likely to affect countries like Rwanda or any other country that is connected to the rest of the world. So when you talk about fake news, Rwanda is not spared. But the situation, when you look at it right now, is not as alarming as you could see elsewhere because there's a lot of awareness and there's a lot of education around there, especially from the government authorities, to really put out there the right information that people can consume. Because in a period like this, people are desperately looking for information, and if you don't have reliable institutions that are really doing a great job of sensitizing and creating awareness among the people, or giving them a lot of possibilities that they can tap into when they're looking for the information, then it means that people are going to consume whatever that is on their disposal. So here, the government, especially health authorities, have tried to do so much to put the information about coronavirus, reliable information out there. And I think journalists have also played a very big role. to really try to be the source of information for people.
Yes, thank you very much. Madam Alicia from Taiwan, there was a very interesting story that which was actually a fake news story whereby it went really viral that apparently there was in Taiwan the doctors had already found the cure to coronavirus, you know, and it excited many people online. So just what is the scope or the impact that fake news has caused in your country? Hello, Madam Alicia, are you there?
Yes. And sorry, can you mention
Yes.
the case you said? I didn't hear it very clearly. Which one?
Okay. There's a story that was going online, especially on Twitter, that doctors in Taiwan had already found out for coronavirus, and the retweets were many, and it elicited a lot of reactions, and it was a very false story. So, just what is the scope of fake news? Yes, how bad or how damaging are these some of these situations are over there?
It's actually very interesting because that news is in China, not in Taiwan. But that's definitely a very well-known case that happened in China, and also that it spread widely in Taiwan. So it's important to understand that there's different situation, and then it's like amid this global pandemic, it's so hard to distinguish the information, and that this and even this case and haven't really been to be distinguished that where this information come from. So about that case, I can say that it's very incredible because even the Chinese governments and try the best to deal with this, to control the public opinions, and then based on the reports that covered by the organization I freelance for, the government actually banned thousands of keywords on social media and also block a lot of accounts. However, Chinese netizens still try their best to save contents and then to protest online in order to keep fact and informations that can help people know more about what the situation actually happened in the country. So I want to say, according to that part, it's important to rethink about the topic we talk about today, that how when I say to the questions that how can we stop the infodemic, the first questions that come on your mind is that can we actually stop it? You can see that the Chinese government tried the best to control it, and however, as Julius just said, it's you can share information just in a second. Everybody can share everything's online. So it's the way how we can react to it or even proactively deal with that. And back to the situation in Taiwan, actually the government has been dealing the virus quite well. So we so far have around 300 confirmed cases and then around five people deaths. So it's incredibly amazing regarding to the measures that taken by the government. One thing I want to mention, I think it would be very interesting as a takeaway, because Taiwan, actually there are several civil groups which is cooperated with the government to deal with the fake news. The fake news, what we talk about is which is not based on the fact. So it's very clear that is fake news, but how to deal with that is because it's so hard to stop it. So the civil groups in Taiwan, they have to react the disinformation and fake news within 2 hours. This is kind of the goal. They try to deal with it, and then they will post a clarification on the official website and the fan page. But one really key things I want to mention is that how the key thing is that how to let the more accurate and evidence-based information spread faster and wider. So at the groups made some post based on humor. So people think it's funny, it's interesting. So they want to share this post. For example, I think it's a kind of similar in many different places that there's a news about you have to rush to the supermarket to buy toilet papers. However, this is not based on the truth. So the government within 2 hours post some things online and not really just say like, you should not buy toilet papers. Instead, they say that, what the hell that the virus would affect you wiping
Hello?
your ass.
Is everybody there?
Oh, yes.
Yes, 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 yes.
Yeah. So it's a, and then this is with the memes of Taiwan's prime minister and a post on his own Facebook. So it spread widely and very fast. So I think that's probably somehow of a way, not only ways, but that will be very effective to combat a lot of disinformation, fake news that we are facing.
But do you actually believe that there is hope in stopping this infodemic? Even just a small ounce of hope in stopping this infodemic? Because the way the public interprets it is very different.
Yeah, I think I think of course there are ways to reduce the panic from this old infodemic, but I think this infodemic is it's kind of natural things because now we have internet and social media, so you can't really control that all individuals have to follow certain ways. And as what Julia says, that it also depends on people's educational levels or how they be aware of the information that they get. But of course, if there are more people who are aware of every piece of information that they get, I think definitely that was an ideal goal we can close to, is to stop it.
No. Thank you so much. Let's move to hope.
Leon,
okay.
I wanted to step in in that conversation. Shane really asked a very important question. Can we really fight? I mean, can we really stop infodemic as the discussion we're talking about, we're having right now? Really, let's look at just a few months ago, earlier this year, when the Director General of World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros, was saying at one of the conferences in Munich, in Germany. I think that's the first time he mentioned that we're not just dealing with an epidemic, we're also dealing with an infodemic. And he mentioned it clearly that at that time, if we don't do something about it, we're really heading down to a path that is going to be very, very dangerous because it could lead people either into a way where they're going to fight each other. And I'll give you a case, for instance. By the time he was saying that, I think there was a small village in Ukraine where some of the nationals who had been airlifted from China to Ukraine were tested, and somebody spread a rumor that all these people had been tested positive for COVID. And you know what happened? When these people arrived in a village in Ukraine, there were a lot of riots, and people were demonstrating against these people. That's a big deal because of a simple rumor that was just spreading. And when you go to other countries, like in the United States, what was happening at the time, both the Democrats and the politicians, and the Republicans, had divergent views of what the virus was about. And Trump, the United States president himself, was even calling it a Chinese virus, even with the facts that were around. So I think fighting it, stopping it is really, really, really hard, because first of all, you have to understand who is spreading the fake news. These are the people we're dealing with. These are politicians. These are people who have their own interests. I think the least we can do is, first of all, politicians themselves. How do we deal with the politicians? Are we in a position? Are we really capable of dealing with the politicians, either who have their own interests? If you have United States, the superpower of the world, that is not speaking the same language about the virus that is already killing millions of people, how do you then say you're going to fight that information?
Now, yeah, you've brought in a very important issue. And on that, Madam Catherine Muhatia, as an expert in audience studies and audience analysis, do you think that much of the blame, or much of the effort rather, should be also on the part of the audience to choose to believe what to believe and what not to believe?
Thank you very much, Leon. I don't want to blame any audience here, because the audience, the journalists are supposed to give the audience news, and they just must understand the different groupings of the audience and know how to package their news. And when you talk about fake news, I want to pose some question, like, so where is it most prevalent? You know, we have different media platforms. We have traditional media where we have radio and television, and we now have social media. And we know that it is the social media that really accommodates fake news from different people, from the politicians, as the journalist from Rwanda has said, and all other people, and our audiences too. What does that mean? That the journalists must step up. You know, that means that there's need for information, factual information. Are we giving that information? If we don't, if rather the journalists don't give that information, then the audience are going to get the information elsewhere, and they will run with it. And now, social media is very easy. Social media is cheap, is fast, and you know, you can publish.
To interject a bit,
yes.
Just with what Julia said, that politicians have their own interests. Now, in Kenya, I'm sure you see headlines every day. There are media houses that are prevalent with publishing headlines targeting a specific politician. And we see some of these politicians, however true the story might be, they end up denying and posting all of us fake news. If you read through the comments of the reactions on those politicians' timelines, you'll find the public, some members of the public, they are saying, yeah, we stand with you. We know they are against you. However true the story is. So where to go? Because you said much of the effort is for the journalist to get the story done. Yes, I will go out there. I will get you the truth. I will get you the headline. I will publish. I have done my part. But when the politician who has his own personal interest gets to it, brands it fake news, now they start coming at me. So what's to do?
So I look at that, and I want to differ a bit, because I look at the stories, especially when it comes to stories that touch on politicians. Unfortunately, we are dealing with a very serious issue here. This is a global pandemic, and you'll still see politicians' names being drawn in, just so that as a journalist, you find favor, you know, with a politician. But we are dealing with very serious issues here. And if you are consistent in your reporting and you're factual throughout, you fact check, you give true stories, you avoid the he said, you said sort of journalism, you know, or news reportage, then I don't think we'll be having this issue. So this issue of the public then siding with politicians has been brought about by the very journalists. Because when we look at the stories that have been done, they lack in terms of depth, right? It is just you said, he said, she said. And so where is your voice in this? Have you done any investigation? Have you verified the claims? so that you're giving us a balanced story. So it is very important that the journalist then tries to pose those questions and try to find out if they really need to step up, and which I think they should, because I think the blame is on journalists. Yes, I'm not saying they've not tried. They have really tried, but we must step up. We must adhere, number one, to the basics of journalism, the ethics and standards of journalism. You know, so when we look at most of the stories, especially what we want to call big stories, and you know, for you to get to a big story, you must start with the small stories. Do you adhere to the ethics and standards? Do they do that? And you know, small things lead to big things. So I think the journalists must start asking themselves, where did the rain start beating them? And if that's the problem, go back to the drawing board. Do what is right, all right? Yeah.
And while you're still on the journalists, I also would love to know, do you think, you know, like we rarely give, for example, in Kenya, we rarely give health the headlines. In fact, right now, I think health journalists are really, as much as it's a pandemic, they're really enjoying it to some sort, because their stories are getting first page stories, their first page prevalence. So do you think our agenda setting mechanism in this era has failed with regards to stories? We've now understood that healthcare is very important, but my fear is that post-corona crisis, we will go back to the reset mode and start politician X said X, politician X said Y, this said this. You know, right now, even a face mask could take the headline away and not a politician.
You see, reason why the stories are getting the front pages is simply because this is a global issue. It is an issue that is now trending, okay? So they cannot avoid it. But the audience, we are dealing again with a very, the audience is very different. It's a very clever audience. So you might get the front page, yes. But if what you're saying is not true, I mean, they have other sources, okay? And I said, we are dealing with a very different audience. It is not an audience of, oh, we set the agenda and you must follow, or we could give you this and you must consume it. That stopped happening. That stopped happening. And so it is very important to know that much as you're getting the front page, there are key things that this person must do, that they must justify why they are getting that front page, that they must do their bit. They must give us depth in their stories, give us correct stories, okay? Correct stories and relevant stories. And remember, the journalists must also know that the stories are not about them, that Catherine has a byline, that's very important. That's not important. The story comes first before the journalist. But I think my observation across board is that most of the journalists want to have the limelight, and it's never about the story. Is that you even want to sensationalize such stories, right? So it becomes a bit tricky, especially, and I've talked about the audience, especially when you're dealing with the kind of audience that we are dealing with now, who want facts, who want properly done stories. They understand that this story has been well researched, okay? But we are too quick. We want to, the issues of you telling the story fast, really. With social media, you still want to tell the story fast. Step back and get the correct details, right? So that you're giving us the correct story. And with that, then we are able to slow down this issue of fake news. But if you don't do that, and the story we see on social media is the same story that you've given us, later you come to apologize, then we are going to have a very a great struggle when it comes to trying to fight fake news. It must start with the journalists, all right?
I think Catherine is making a very strong precedent from her first statement, the opening statement, which I think you made a very strong precedent about journalists really having a very big responsibility to address fake news. But let's be realistic. Journalists 50 years ago were the guards of information. 50 years down the road, let's talk about the kind of environment we are working in at the moment. fake news in the era of Trump is different from fake news in the era of, I don't know, any other president we've seen before. First of all, journalists have to be equipped. Who, who, who are we dealing with? We're dealing with politicians who are powerful. Let's take an example of the United States, which I like to, because that's where we've seen fake news really, really taking a different shape when Trump came the president. Now, during the presidential campaigns, a lot of fake news, even the concept itself, fake news, really took a different stage because now everyone was talking about it. Even people who didn't know what it was, everyone was talking about fake news because you had people who were pushing for different agendas, everyone looking at his own interests and pushing his own agenda to be out there. So in this instance, what is it? How powerful are the politicians? I mean, are the journalists to be able to counteract what these powerful politicians, who are most of the times backed by even big business people, billionaires who have big agendas. I think we have also to be realistic when we are talking about the role that journalists can play. Now, let's talk about in this era of coronavirus. The truth is people are very desperate in terms of crisis because everyone wants to get the information. So they consume whatever that is their disposal. That's a fact, and it's human nature for people to consume the information. Now you have social media, which is being blamed for spreading of fake news. But to me, social media technically shouldn't be a very bad platform because social media, for instance, today, the scenario, if an emergency situation happens in the village, someone can save people just by sending pictures of what's happening in the village, and people will be saved. So I don't want to blame too much social media, but I also blame the people. Right now, when a statement comes out that Kenya or Rwanda has registered 2 or 10 more coronavirus cases, trust me, you're going to find that statement on everyone's timeline or WhatsApp status or everywhere. To the extent that everyone wants to share news, even the news that they don't understand where it comes from. Somebody picks a statement. Trust me, if today I issue a statement, the same statement that my Ministry of Health shares when new cases have been registered, that statement, if I share it, even if it was fake, is likely to be distributed because everyone is running to share the news, even the people who are not journalists. You get it? That's how much everyone has become part of the information society. People want to share, and these are not journalists only. I think we have to. I don't want to blame the society or the audience because, well, the audience are the majority, and I won't blame them. But I would go to the extreme to say, how do we make sure that people are sensitized in a sense that when they see something, they verify before sharing. You know, today when I share a tweet, somebody is likely to tweet because before even verifying where this tweet comes from. But I would tell the audience, I mean, the biggest role we have as journalists is spread that awareness. The people have to rely on sources that give them the right information, whether be it the health authorities, be it prominent journalists, be it media houses that are trusted. That's one of the biggest roles that we can play in this era where everyone has become a journalist.
Yes. And back to Madam Alicia. Madam Alicia, you mentioned something about humor. Some people post things to create humor. So in the culture of today with the digital disruption, we have a tendency of creating fun or jokes out of even very serious situations where people are losing lives. Where do we draw the line? That is a question I would answer. I would love to ask, because much of the talk today, and if you look online, if you look even some of us journalists, we create humor out of those situations that are very serious. So the main solutions and main issues to be addressed end up getting lost in the jokes we make, in the humor, in the rush for retweets and likes. And people take some of those jokes as to what is actually the situation on the ground. Before we proceed, I wish to welcome Madam Tirian Chebet with us. Thank you so much for joining us. So, Madam Alicia, where do we draw the line?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and then I think it's a very essential to know how to use this humor and the creativity to actually combat the fake news, but not really cross the ethical lines. Based on the situation, I observe that some officials, like governmental officials or like trustworthy institutes, use this weight of humor to spread information, which carry the evidence-based information and peg with the way that people would like to share. But the jokes or things, of course, as you say, that's all about the people's lives. So I'm not really talking about like making a jokes on like people's deaths or how people are suffering, but the way that how you can later accurate information to spread faster and wider, because as what we discussed before, that on social medias or different platforms where you can get information, it's really hard, very, very difficult to stop it. And so it's important as a consumers can be more aware of where this information come from and where the jokes come from, or is it jokes or is it humor with accurate information. So back to every individual, I think it's important to hold back before sharing and then to ask more questions that where this information come from, and what would be the intention behind what is told and what is not told. So and then from the side of those who are responsible for sharing accurate or evidence-based information. What I want to highlight a humor or like a creative ways to spread the news, because even now that journalists or a lot of media workers try their best to share accurate information. But on social media, people easily share something very emotionally or some words very simple, but that can really touch their heart. It's also essential to let your information spread. So if you make so much effort on one piece to find so much evidence to support that, okay, this is actually a quality and evidence-based piece, but nobody share it, or because it's too long or too much words, so people can't really get the message from it, and how can we like really deal with the problem of infodemic. So what I want to say is that there are different ways to let your information spread widely, but also crucial to be aware that as a consumer, we have to keep asking questions that where the information comes from.
Okay, thank you very much. Madam Tirian Chebet, welcome. Kindly introduce yourself.
All right. Hello, everybody. Jennifer, Yin, Catherine, Julius, and Leon. First of all, my apologies. I guess I will not even start to explain, but do accept my apologies for coming in quite late. My name is Terian Chebet. I am currently the general manager of Metropole TV in Kenya. Metropole is one of the newest kids on the block. We're a 24-hour business channel.
Thank you so much. And just to welcome you, I first would love to ask you this question. With regards to fake news, we know because business is what runs the world. Economies right now are in a shutdown mode and everything is frozen. So how are you managing? How are you navigating through the very many stories and very many hearsay stories that are coming out in the business world?
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Leon. I think for us as business journalists, one of the, and it's a bad thing to say, but it's one of the most exciting times in terms of a journalism career, because for the first time, at least since the financial crisis of 2008 thereabout, and many of the journalists that I'm working with today were very young, during the financial crisis. But this is a time to really redefine how we create content that actually connect to people. Because at the end of the day, whether you're somebody who works for government or you have your own business, every single person is being affected by what's going on around the world currently. And in as much as, in some of the past crises that we've had in the financial sector, sometimes we don't really feel it, as Kenyans in such a tangible way. But this one, we are already seeing job cuts. We're seeing salary cuts across. Some companies even closing for some time, especially in the hospitality sector. So this is the first time that many of us as Kenyan journalists are actually engaging with a situation like this. So it is a chance to redefine how do we create content that connects and joins all the dots? How do we create content that will not only spread, but really tell the story for what it is? For instance, we're looking at projections of the economy, for instance. Now there's been an announcement that, the world is through a recession. And, going back into our journalism books, really, and to how do we tell stories that connect? How do we get people to really understand what the impact would be? If the World Bank has out as a global recession, what does that mean to you and me as a Kenyan? So it's a couple of very interesting weeks, but really look to the stories, reading between the lines. Because if you look at the announcements, for instance, in Kenya, it's a lot around, of course, keeping the spread of the virus, flattening the curve, as they call it. But there's very little that has been said or has been, said about the economy. We're hearing about the job cuts and the pay cuts, but nobody's really fully focusing on the impact of this COVID-19 pandemic to the economy. So for us as a station, it's really, one, reading between the lines, but two, creating content that any Kenyan, no matter your age, no matter your background, will really understand what this means for us from an economic perspective. So it's been an interesting time and a learning curve for many of us as well. The headlines have changed. If you see the papers in the last couple of weeks, all the headlines have changed. So for us, it's how do we ensure that even though the huge focus is on sanitizing, keeping safe, staying home, but the economic perspective touches all of us. So it's in a nutshell, that's how it's been, and that's how we're navigating that space.
Now, just a quick question to you, Madam. The government keeps inspiring and telling us to stay positive and everything will be better, and gives us a lot of energy to go on, which is expected, which is very good. And I'm just glad Madam Muhate is also here, because in class she taught me as a student never to trust 100% what the government says. So this is the time I want to pose this question to you. Are we pushing back? Are we like asking the question, are we checking or are we just depending on stories and updates from the government and what the government is telling us? Because I see people rushing to press conferences and they come back, they tweet, oh, this press conference starts at 3:30, so and so is saying. So are we interrogating all the information that we are getting? That is what I would love to know.
Of course, first of all, I would say, the government has done a good job, in as much as, yes, sometimes our work as the fourth estate or as the watchdog is to really put them to task. But on the very first take, I would say the government has been very much in the driver's seat and making sure that, we have information. Of course, there's been fears here and there about the accuracy of some of that data. And that is where I would say, are we as journalists really, pushing the boundaries a little bit more to find out if there is any doubt about the data, what are we doing about it? But it's such a controlled space currently, and there's also that little moral compass sometimes that touches us all as journalists, where there's a fear of, will we be spreading information if we try to look for data from somewhere else? Because currently it's a government that is sort of the is the control of the data. So for us as journalists, what I would like to see more, one, is analysis of that data, doing our own tallies if we can, without compromising the safety of the journalists, first of all, because it would mean exposure. For them to get some of this data, it would mean exposure, which is it's a thin line that we are all trading on currently. Another thing I would like to see is there's a lot of regurgitation where, as you say, there's a press conference at 3 and all we air is a press conference at 3. And then, 1 or 2 interviews. I feel that on the analysis part and trying to get global perspectives as well, we haven't quite caught it yet, the Kenyan media, if I may use that example. So we are keeping it very local. From the local space, we are giving data on, South Africa, X number of new infections, Spain, X number of new infections, Italy, New York, etc. But how else can we interact or interrogate, scientists, doctors in those other places to give us some more data that we can actually use and then, do a comparative with some of the data analyzing here. So I think because it is a global pandemic, we shouldn't close ourselves to a little cocoons and say this is how Kenya is reporting it. We should, especially because now we're getting access to such, great people out there, whether via Zoom, we should take the advantage of the digital space to actually interact with more stakeholders who are in the global space to hear stories from those as well. I've seen a number of the media houses have managed to speak to, you yourself, Leon, for instance, in India. We've Citizen also talked to some people in China. Ourselves as Metropole, we also try to speak to somebody or two people from different countries at least a day. So we have Uganda, Nigeria, Morocco, South Africa, and anywhere else really we can find somebody to speak with. So we need to also look at that global perspective and say, how can we reconnect and use the global stories? Because it's a global pandemic,
Yes. And now, talking of the infodemic that we are tackling today, there are many stories with regards to foreign nationals. They are emanating and there are many accusations. And as a journalist out here, I would dare say that one of the biggest challenges that I'm personally facing is that our embassies abroad are unwilling to give information. They're unwilling to alert us. You call someone, so that for me contributes. But now journalists back home, and all you also as a media leader, how are you following up on the foreign? Because, for example, I'll tell you that Kenyans in India who had come to seek medical treatment and the 21 lockdown was put in place and they're stuck, they're in the streets of Delhi. but no one gets to talk about them. So how do we move forward? Are journalists in other African countries, and this question will go as well to Julius, are journalists in Rwanda thinking of the Rwandan nationals who are abroad?
Oh, wow, that's it's really a sad situation. And it's today I spoke to somebody who was delivering something for Mitchell's, and one of his delivery persons had gone home to visit just before the semi-lockdown was announced for Nairobi, Kilifi, and Mombasa. So he's basically stuck where he is, and he cannot come back to work. And this is somebody who's paid on a daily basis. So that for me was quite an eye opener in the fact that yes, this may just be Kenya, but as you say, there's many there who may they were not there for work, they were not there for holiday, they were there to do something that had to do, like either in India, as you say, a medical case, and perhaps it's time for us to really put feet to the fire of our leaders. Our embassies are embassies for a certain reason. This is when they should really show what their work really is, because just looking at the story of China the other day and the Kenyans really panicking because feeling like, okay, we're going to get kicked out of this country, it's unsafe, nobody wants us here, and even our government doesn't seem to care. So as journalists, I think we need to light that fire now. In our airport, JKIA, for instance, in as much as it's closed to international flights, it is open to airlines that are repatriating their own people. So why are we not applying the same to Kenyans who are stuck in places like India, or as people who went out for medical, or students, for instance? So it's a time for us journalists to really decide. The same way we did, the newspapers had this great, where together we stand with Kenya headline on Friday. We need to then stand up and say, what are we doing for the Kenyans who are not here and are stuck somewhere? So I appreciate your question, Leon, and I just hope that us as journalists and Julius, Catherine, and the rest of us who are here will then begin to light that fire and ask our government. Our Kenyans are stuck out there.
And I would love to ask this, because this is a very recurring question. Remember, to our audience and our viewers, we are sampling your questions on the YouTube. Don't think we've forgotten you. I'm seeing your comments. I'll be fronting them to our panel, and they'll be responding to them. But just before we go to another panelist, perhaps Terian, if you could chip in on this. What is fake news? Everyone is asking, what is the origin of fake news? People are not understanding the origin of fake news at all, with regards to the inception and vis-a-vis that. So as our senior journalist, kindly, if you break it down for us.
First of all, calling me senior journalist, I feel very old. But I'll try to respond. Fake news is fake. First of all, it's information that is misleading and is not right. It's not factual. However, a lot of fake news is first fueled by, because of the digital space, we are all in a space where we are sharing everything. Somebody calls you and says a story, somebody sends you something on WhatsApp that sounds interesting, and immediately you forward it without thinking. Remember that time when, they're saying, oh, this thing will not reach Africa because our temperature is, we're in the tropical, we're a tropical region, and the coronavirus not survive above a certain temperature. And, and before we found out the truth, like, hiya, maybe this could be true. And of course, it eventually turned out to be fake. But sometimes fake news actually does sound credible, but it's up to all of us, not just journalists on this one. It's up to all of us to just do the extra. It's unfortunately we've become so lazy, but we also see our fellow journalists sharing stories that are not factual because they didn't care to check if the story is right or wrong. And because there's so much fake news, or leads that will lead you to a fake story, there has never been a more critical time for a journalist to, one, check your sources properly, because your source may be certain and sure that this is the right information, but maybe it's not. And number two, we shouldn't be so quick to break the news because we found this incredible story that we haven't really done the background check on. So I'd say, be slow. You might be scooped sometimes, but let's be slow to just jump the breaking story until we've actually, confirmed that. It wouldn't hurt to call one or two people, including, government if need be, just to get facts. And especially with this corona pandemic, for us as journalists, it's been, okay, how do we know that's true? How do we know that's true? Because there's been such many stories right from the beginning. But really now is when we must go back to the patience and integrity of what the journalism profession is all about. So we have to check, because we have to give out actual information. So it's just going back to the basics for me.
Mr. Julius, how do we identify what is fake news and what is not?
Well, I think first of all, to the first question you had asked, what is the origin of fake news? I think people tend to look at fake news or to try to interpret it as some kind of a complex word. But in real sense, fake news, of course, it's definitely associated with politicians in this era. But fake news is just false information. So asking its origin would be the same as asking, is there been a time in history where people had never shared false information? Definitely not. People have always shared false information. Whoever you can think of, whether it's your grandmother, whether it's your grandmother or your grandfather, people always shared false information. But the idea of fake news being a concept that it has taken a different stage, it's because of the politicians, really, to ask me, because politicians have used this concept, for various reasons. People pushing their political agendas, people want to influence, views of the people, and that's why it has changed the shape and how people interpret it. But in real sense, false information has always been there before even the emergence of social media and the internet. So to the question you just asked about how do we identify fake news or false information, I think first of all we need to be vigilant. If you're reading a story, for instance, ask yourself, can you vet the author of this story? Who's this person? Has he ever written anything before? And most of the fake news have sensationalist characteristics. Somebody has knocked by, I don't know, something, and this and this has happened. Even before verifying. So I think that's one of the ways. Is it a sensationalistic piece of information that is being shared? And they look at, for instance, the domain names, which sometimes are changed. You find, like abcnews.com, the fake news website. You find the r.co, for instance. So as a reader, you're supposed to be very cautious when you're reading, to check all these things, check the domain name, you check the author, you vet the author. Has this person ever written anything credible? And also you try to find out this is something new or it's being brought up again, for various reasons. I think there's so many ways. For prose, there are so many websites you can use to verify fake news if you want. But the basics really, if you see something, if you check, like a document, you're an ordinary citizen, you check a document about the new coronavirus that have been registered? Is it a stamped document? Has it been shared anywhere else apart from the person who shared it? For instance, has it been shared at the Ministry of Health website or Twitter handle, for instance? Those simple basics that people can use to verify information.
Okay, thank you so much. Madam Catherine Mohati, as a lecturer, I would love to know, because you are the one who teaches us definitions every day. What is fake news, and what is the impact of fake news? And 3, how do young people, especially those going into digital, young journalists, take advantage of opportunities, if I may say, that fake news, disinformation, and misinformation bring to us? And what is the difference between these 3 things: fake news, disinformation, and misinformation?
So, is this question to me or what?
Madam Catherine. Madam Catherine.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Madam Catherine, are you there?
You have to unmute yourself. Catherine, you have to unmute yourself.
Okay, while you're still setting Madam Catherine up, perhaps Madam Alicia, you could tackle this. What is misinformation, disinformation, and fake news? How do we distinguish between these 3 aspects? Because we hear people talking about them. Madam Alicia, you there?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I would try to distinguish the streets, although I think the streets are also intertwined, because some could be disinformation and fake news at the same time, or some could be misinformation and fake news. So I think we already addressed quite a lot at what fake news are. And so fake news are not, the information is not factual, it's not based on the fact. But like disinformation, for me, it's like more deliberately produced by some sort of people to promote some things with a specific purpose. So maybe that's manipulated by some politicians or the government. So they have a very specific goals to tackle some things or some sort of groups in order to reach some goals. But with fake news, basically more neutral to say that the information is not correct or is not based on the fact. And the misinformation, maybe it is partially true, but that's a kind of misleads the public to some directions, which could cause some negative problems and so on. So it's not like completely wrong, but like it's intensively to direct the information. So that's basically what I understand these trees, and I think it's very difficult for people, even for me, to actually identify what are this all informations come from. So I think. So can you hear me clearly?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay,
very clearly.
So I think, for example, I'm an independent journalist, so I don't really cover the breaking news. I cover more in-depth coverage. So for me, at the first moment when the virus outbreak, and I actually hope that, because I, as a consumer, a bunch of information online is actually very overwhelming for me. So I can't. Can you hear me?
Yes, you can hear you.
Okay. Yeah. So.
Yes.
So for me, at the beginning, it's also very hard to actually distinguish what's fake news, disinformation, or misinformation. And evidence-based information. So I think it's important. One thing is to reckon your mistakes, because everybody make mistakes, like as a journalist as well. Like for example, a month ago, maybe you believe in some things, but actually you found out that it's actually wrong. And I think as a media workers, it's essential to also reckon the mistakes that we make, because it's very natural. We probably will produce some things wrong, especially when there's a bunch of information in front of you and you have to address it. And the second thing is that as an independent journalist, I think there's an advantage that I can take my time to investigate it and to double check my information. And so when I feel more comfortable that I actually know that what's going on different sides, so I take the one position that, okay, maybe this is an angle that is missing and I can cover it. So I think that what I want to say is like, it's very hard to distinguish in the reality, but one thing we can do is to clarify it or to reckon our mistakes, and that's probably the things I want to share.
Yes, perhaps, Madam Alicia, if I may ask this before I let you go. As a journalist, I know there are many young journalists who are watching this right now, and I just want you to share with them what are the new, in terms of technology and the digital, what are the new ways and maybe the new technologies out there that they can actually use to educate themselves, tools or anything like that, that they can use to be able to actually do their work more diligently in terms of fake news, in terms of when they see images and videos, how do they navigate through the whole thing? Can you hear me?
Yeah. You asked me these questions, right? I can't really hear very clearly. Okay, so yeah, I think there are a lot of like multiple medias and a lot of like platforms that we can use right now. I think live stream is actually a really good way that we can get closer to the fact. And there are also a lot of things, and social medias also have different platforms, and they have a different advantage and disadvantage that we can use. And everybody now, we can own our own media like Facebook, Twitter, so we can post the things, and we can be our own. We can own our media.
Yes. What I wanted to know, what kind of softwares or tools or new technologies are there out there, especially in Asia, for example, that people are using for fact checking, for verification, you know, or to be able to track down on misinformation and things like that?
Yeah, I think there are quite a few things, but for me let me say, because I forgot the name, but there's actually some tools that you can use, and you can install it on your Chromes or your software. One thing that I use is called, it's actually in Chinese, that like that we use widely here, and so it's kind of a news helper. And so I use that, and so that will send you a warning that this might be disinformation. And also, I don't know that if any other people also have some other tools I can share, but in general, that I use these tools to check, because I can check both English and Chinese, and so that I can use it more widely when I do my work. Yeah.
Yes. Is Madam Catherine back with us, Jennifer?
Not yet. I think she has to leave and come back. There's something wrong with her microphone. But I would want like that question for Julius to respond, because I think he had mentioned earlier questions.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Julius? The floor is yours, sir.
I think you had asked the question about you know, disinformation and misinformation.
Yes.
One. I think both disinformation or misinformation or even malinformation are specific terms that describe what fake news is about. Just to break it down for ordinary people, when you talk about disinformation, for instance, that is false information that is deliberately, created to harm, people or an organization or even a country. And then when you have, on the other hand, misinformation, is false information that is created non-necessary to create harm. You find a journalist, for instance, writing a story without verifying and publish such a story, but such a story is not entirely meant to mislead people, but it's perhaps done out of ignorance. That's misinformation. And then on the other side, you have malinformation, which is sometimes based on the reality, on evidence, but is evidence that is aimed at inflicting harm on people or even the organization or country. So all those are terms that describe in short what fake news is about. And I think for the platforms that quite different platforms, journalists really use Google. Just one click away to get any kind of tool you can want. But there's some of the prominent sites. You have, I think, something like factcheck.org is one of the prominent one. I think we have the other one which I normally use is International Fact Checking Network, which also have some options that help you to verify whether the information is true or not. Source. But even Google itself, when you do the reverse check of images on Google, you still see whether the image is true or it's a fabricated image or it's something that is published with a certain age or something. So there are quite a lot of tools, but if people want, you can compile them after this live and you could share with them.
Okay, thank you very much. And before we proceed, I wish to thank all those guys who are viewing us. I've seen Madam Linda Baisi, I've seen Mr. Eric Gatobus, the editor at Kenyans, which is a very popular news website in Kenya. Then I've seen Mr. Samuel also. So, and Mr. Eric raises a very interesting point, which I would like you, Madam Terian Chebet, to kindly react to. Mr. Gatobu says there is no fact checking in broadcast space, and he thinks there should be a dedicated bulletin for fact checking, that it will really help with fighting the infodemic. What's your take on that, Madam Chebet? Madam Chebet, are you there?
First of all, well, the opening statement. Yes, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, yes.
You can hear me?
Yes, yes, I can hear you, Madam Chebet.
All right. First of all, I would like to start with a correction that his opening statement that there is no fact checking in broadcast is incorrect, because in as much as the broadcast, is seen as traditional in its senses, but there's a very usually a very strong editorial team, at least in the big media houses that exist in Kenya today. So before a story is actually on air, it takes a few levels of editors who are fact checkers in a sense. So in as much as maybe in a traditional newsroom, they may not be very quick to go on some of the fact checking platforms like the ones Julius has mentioned, but always been a system where you can actually check for facts. And it may not be the very modern ones, but there's always been a system of ensuring that what goes on air is actually correct information and it's factual. So first of all, the statement is incorrect. However, I do agree with him on the need to put out information just to make sure that people know, hey, this is not true. This is actually, what the fact is. And I've seen some websites like Africa Check, which do a very good job on information like that. And perhaps it would be now a time for traditional media houses to go into partnerships with fact-checking institutions. And for instance, if Africa Check is only online, can you together then develop content for TV, perhaps as a collaborative effort? So I do agree with him on the second point. However, on the first one, I don't agree. There's still systems in place. And at least in Kenya, I feel that the majority of fake news is actually from the online platform, from politicians as well, from social media. And if social media is anything to go by and reports on facts and what are not facts, it's broadcast stations actually rarely, they do make those mistakes, but it's not as much as the online platform. So we all have to strike a balance. So it's not a blame game, but I feel that the sword needs to fall heavier actually on the digital platforms. And some of these digital platforms are even owned by traditional media houses, and they may not have the same regular channels of checking that are in a regular newsroom. So there's a lot that needs to, because most of this originates within the digital space.
Thank you so much.
I don't know if you can hear me now. Can you hear me,
yes.
Leon?
Yes.
Catherine,
yes.
And I know I'm having
yes, Madam Catherine.
I'm having a challenge with the audio, but let me just echo what Terian has said.
Yes.
I think Kenyan journalists are trying, yes. And as I had mentioned earlier, you'll find a lot of fake news on social media, and not from, of course, people who have been trained in media studies or the journalists. And so how do you counter that as journalists? We expect that then they use the same platforms, because we know now we are on apart from the traditional radio and television, we now have the social media platforms. It is important that the journalists then churn out information through those channels, of course, information that has been well researched, all right? So that you counter the fake news, because then we are not fighting, but you are the people who have the powers then to give the audience the correct information. So those platforms, therefore, should be used, all right? So I think it's important that the social media platforms are used. I think they are underused, especially during this period, then when we are handling this global pandemic. It is so important to understand the different platforms and to use them properly, you know?
Now, Madam, as an expert in, yes, Madam Muhatia, I wanted to ask, as an expert in audience management and analysis, how many stories have you seen are there that are covering children? And what is the impact of COVID-19 on children?
Well, I am not in a position to give the exact number. Probably I've seen a cartoon here and there, and you have brought up, I think, a very important issue of the audiences and the different audiences that we have. It is important when you talk about children, can we have now the producers who handle children's programs then package this information in a way that then the children are able to consume and use that information effectively. They understand how the language they will use, probably is it drama, the format that they're going to use, because then we don't expect to have interviews from morning to evening and expect that all audiences are able to stay in and listen and are happy. No, the young people, for example, I mean, which is their platform, social media, which is their format. I mean, what are you going to use to make sure that you get this information through to the young people?
Yes.
You cannot use it is very, that we must understand the different audiences and then therefore package information differently so that it suits the different categories of audiences. And this is very important. And probably this is where we're a bit, we've not really done very well in this area, where we need to differentiate different the audiences and package the information accordingly. I think we need to do that. The journalists need to do that.
Yes. Madam Chebet, kindly, would you react to the same question? Yes.
Yes, please. I wanted to just talk about an interesting perspective. And this we partnered with Mtoto News as Metropole TV. So I was very excited when I saw that Mtoto News and Jennifer would be on this panel as well. On International Children's Day, for instance, we took the initiative to work closely with Mtoto News, and we had children on all the shows, the Business AM show, which is first thing in the morning and run through the day. So we had a co-host was a child who had been trained by Mtoto News. And recently as well, we asked ourselves the same question. Yes, we're looking at this from a very adult perspective, but children need to know. So we reached out to Jennifer and we had a conversation, and we actually had in studio a young boy from Toto News, and he carried out a whole interview where he was asking questions to an expert in studio as a child. We didn't tell him what questions to ask. Of course, there was a little bit of preparation, but for us it was, let us give children a voice as well. Let them ask questions in the language they understand and in the way they understand. So for us, that's why I asked if I could just contribute, because that was the ways in which we know that we were able to reach out to a younger audience that we, sometimes we often tend to ignore as media houses.
Thank you very much. And Madam Alicia, is the situation in Asia, specifically Taiwan, different? How is the coverage of children there and the impact of COVID-19 stories in children?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question, and then I think a lot of especially in mainstream media that hasn't been aware of the contents covering children and also the targeting children. So I have to reckon there's a lot of efforts that we need to deal with that. But also that in Taiwan, there's institutes that can actually set up some regulations that what would be harm for children and what content that the media outlet should be responsible for ensuring that the content is not that violent or it's suitable as well for the children. But of course, I think as what other panelists has mentioned, it's a dismayed issues, and then we should be more aware of it. And I think it's not just about the children, but also for example, for more vulnerable populations and how this content actually addressed their issues, or to be aware of that different groups of people might be affected by the news that we produce in different ways. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Before we come back to Madam Jennifer, who, because she handles children on a day-to-day basis, she will give us a lot of insight into it. I just want us to go to Rwanda a bit and find out if journalists in Rwanda are actually prioritizing children. For example, I would love to know what is the term schedule for children looking like now that they are at home, there is no school. Are they going to have exams? What are they keeping? What's keeping them at home now that they're on lockdown and those things, which has really affected them with the result to COVID-19? So, Mr. Julius, the floor is yours, kindly, sir.
I'm really afraid I may not answer that in a very appropriate way, because I don't specialize in children's reporting. I'm a business reporter. but if you ask me as a normal citizen or a journalist who try to read a few things here and there, I would say children's reporting here in Rwanda is really not as prioritized as other stories, to be honest. But I could tell you, I've seen, different stakeholders coming up, be it schools, because you talk about the lockdown that has made it impossible for children to go to school. Now, the option is, how do you make sure that they have other, alternatives where they could, for instance, read programs that help them to understand perhaps what's going on. And the government has, I think, scheduled both radio and TV programs that teach children here in Rwanda, and that's a fact. And we've seen, like the Ministry of Education and other stakeholders in education really setting up online education platforms, the e-learning programs that help children, to focus more on school rather than spending that time consuming other things that might not necessarily be important. So I think there's a lot of work being done in that regard.
Oh, thank you very much. Madam Jennifer, kindly, the floor is yours.
Sorry, may I add on that a bit?
Okay.
Yeah, I said I think it's important to reckon that there's some dismissed angles amid this virus outbreak. It's of course children will be one of groups that have been dismissed, but also there are a lot of vulnerable populations and haven't been covered that much, like indigenous peoples, migrant workers, and refugee populations, and also women who suffered domestic violence. And so I think it's also very important for journalists and in this meantime to find that angles which hasn't been voiced enough, because although that the virus can reach everybody, but global inequality is very crucial, that not everyone has the same social economic cost to combat it. But I, based on my observation, I think media outlets can do more to cover that, and then also independent journalists can also find fresh angles or which hasn't been covered that much, and I think that will help to give more complete picture of what's really going on in different sides from more global perspectives.
Thank you. Jennifer, are you there?
Okay, thank you. Yes, I'm there. I'm in the dark. We don't have power. Kenya Power happened. So I'm going to, if you can't see me, it's because of the power. We don't have power. So for me, COVID-19 is impacting children in so many ways, and information is the number one, because, we consume, as adults, we consume the information that we are reading or watching or whatever, and then we translate it to our children. Okay, the big one is the China one. That's COVID-19. What Ariane said, that Black people don't get the virus, children don't get the virus. So, and that's when we translate and tell our children, no, you're a Black person, you're not going to get it. You're a child, you're not going to get it, and that is impacting children. And then the following day, a child dies, and they are watching news. A child has died. What impact does that have on them? So it's a matter of balancing, because whatever we are watching, because like I read a report, I think earlier this week, about the WhatsApp is number one place where misinformation is being communicated. So how can we ensure that we have our children don't consume the same information? How can we be able to filter some of the information that we are getting so that children don't get, because it's impacting socially. They feel like this kind of people, we're getting questions from children, in our inboxes. Why did these people not come? Sorry, Alicia, why did Chinese not stay in China? And why did they have to go all over the country? You see, creating those kind of discrimination. And then why can't we take these herbs? Because these herbs, because they are good for us, because that's what they had. So, and then it's causing fear, because, if you have fear, that is translated to your children. If you're anxiety, you're anxious, that is also impacting your children. If you hear this information, like there's one that was going around this week or last week about some parts of Kenya, they have tested 30 people who have. And I remember one of my colleagues, and that's her home village, and she's like, oh my goodness, my people are dying, and it was really bad. And her people are not actually, it was fake news. Those people, none of them was infected. It was fake news. So that anxiety, we actually pass it on our children. We read the information but pass it to our children. But we have children who are on social media, who are consuming this information, and all of a sudden you see a child goes outside, takes soil, and they start mixing it up and drinking it because they have been told this is medicine for coronavirus. They start acting funny or doing this because they have been told this is medicine for coronavirus. So it's affecting our children as much as it's affecting, but because our children don't have the capacity to make logic or to think through it, and they cannot think through the information, it is impacting them more. So I think that's it. Thank you so much, guys. Let me go back to my technique work. Thank you.
Okay. And just to add on, I will wish to give you what is happening in India. For example, a few weeks ago, when this all started, there was a rumor that eating chicken will get you infected with coronavirus. So what Indians did around here is that they dug very big holes and started burying all the chicken. They had all the chicken farmers who are burying or selling others at 9 rupees, which is like 11 Kenya shillings. So because they could not afford to keep chicken and feed them when they cannot sell them. So this is one of the incidences where we have such an impact on the economy in terms of food because of fake news. And this is the more reason why we need to nip this issue in the bud. And this leads me to our next topic, which I wish we discuss safety, because as much as we are going to eradicate fake news and misinformation by covering the truth, as Madam Muhatia told us, the safety of journalists right now in the field is very important. And covering a virus, I don't know, Madam Terian, as a media leader, as a manager, how have you been handling your team with regards to safety? And by this, I'm looking also at online harassment of journalists who raise issues and react and do stories as well.
All right. It's as if we are soldiers on the front line, because sometimes it's a journalist's job. And I say journalism, it is in times like this that you realize it's a calling and not just a job, or a career. And sometimes because of that, we push ourselves to the danger zone, and this time to exposure because of the search of a story. But we have had to, really retrospect. And one of the things, for instance, that we decided as a channel is that we will not attend the live briefings on health, and we will pick the feed from one of the other channels. First of all, because there's and I'm sure you recall the number of journalists who would all go and be filming. The same thing is going live on every channel, but on just different cameras. So we said, why would we expose our journalists? Yet the content is the same. What the CS will say from the beginning to the end is the same thing that all the channels present will run. So unless you get to have an interview or ask some questions, and with a couple of other editors from other channels, we asked ourselves, can we then even share questions? if you're sending a journalist, can we send you some questions where your journalist could ask on our behalf, since we're picking the feed from you, from you anyway. Some of that has happened, some of it has not. But for us, safety is more important than anything else. So that's one way where we said we're not going live. And if we must, we'll send one person who would be a camera, maybe with a live streaming, but then it would be for specific reason. Either we've managed to get an interview that we would not otherwise get if we pick the feed from another channel. And for that, I would say that as editors and as media managers, we would have to just take our egos down a little bit. We don't all have to be there, and you've seen in other countries, in the US and the UK, it's one live stream, and then the media houses pick the live stream, because it's exposure, and it's putting such a risk that people who are making these decisions are not out in the field. We're sitting in a desk somewhere in the office, so we have to be real, one, and we have to put our egos down as managers and really look at it from the perspective of, this is a human being we're putting at risk, and not only that person, but because they will come back to the newsroom and interact with everybody else. So how are we taking care of them about that? One of the things that you'd raised, Leon, was also burnout, because this is a period where everybody's on call, everybody's doing something, yet we're also supposed to work only a certain number of hours because we cannot all be in the newsroom at one time. So we've taken on shifts for one. We're working in shifts. Another one, we have now gotten some of the anchors to host their shows from home, so they do not have to come to the office. Another thing we're doing is everybody's now multitasking. If you're, some of our producers are doing live interviews on Skype, and and filming that. So everybody is sort of getting a little bit fluid with the things that my JD says. I'm a general manager, for instance, but I'm also producing now, and I'm also hosting and doing some interviews. So all of us, and I think this is the beginning of a shift, of a radical shift in how journalism will look, going forward, where the more skilled you are, the more marketable you are. So you might be somebody who is, let's say, even running the auto cue, but can you TX? Can you be a producer? Can you do ABC? And I think the future newsroom is a newsroom that will have a lot more multi-skilled people than what our current JDs say today.
Thank you so much. And just before, one thing I would love you to know, for you to tell us, especially for us young journalists, what are some of the gaps that can you advise us to fill? As a manager, what do you look for now, especially with COVID-19 stories that you need this, and so what opportunities can we take advantage of?
All right, I think there's very many opportunities to tell stories with a human touch. We've been in places, because it's such a top-down perspective, because governments are the ones running, the information. But as journalists, we need to still, there's a big gap in connecting with regular. Sorry, my battery is a bit low, so I'm just hoping it doesn't go off. But it's a time for journalists to really find stories that connect, the human touch, because at the end of the day, it is a human touch that makes the biggest stories. And it doesn't, and I know in newsrooms sometimes the stories with a human touch are seen as, those are features desk, features people, they're light stories. But even as business journalists, we really need to share stories that connect with people, because then we're making an impact. And I often feel, and I heard that Julius is also a business journalist. I feel that as business journalists, sometimes we like to, and I'm a business journalist, so I'm speaking from experience. It's like we like to feel intellectual. And one of my bosses used to call us these people of market capitalization, and for me that was when I said, then we're not connecting with people, you know, because we are the ones who use the jargon. We're talking about, like you see the conversation that was on Twitter this week, or quantitative easing. You know, we like to use those big words, but how are we connecting with people? We're not. So for me, the gap, even as business journalists, is how do you connect quantitative easing to my mother in the village? How do I communicate a global recession to the lady selling vegetables on the street? You know, so for me, and I had a conversation with somebody recently about the Great Depression, and we were looking for stories that possible stories that were done around the Great Depression. Not, and I was, you know, very curiously found out, especially if you look at films, the films that were made around the Great Depression were all about hope. There were very few that were done that were just about, we're all depressed, we're going to die, the world is ending, you know, ABCD. So there's a chance for us as well, as a whole, as a global community, to really find hope, even in the place that we find ourselves in today. For those of us, many of us who were not there when the Spanish flu happened, you know, and some of the global pandemics, we have never experienced death at a global level, this much deaths at a global level, you know. So for us, we have to go back to ask ourselves, and what does this posit? Because you see, as a journalist, if you're doing a story that will connect with me in Kenya, it's a time for us to also do stories that can connect with Julius in Rwanda. Yes, I might be filing a story from Mombasa, from Kisumu, but will Julius find it interesting? Because we live in little cocoons. I do stories for Kenya, I do stories for Rwanda, I do stories for whatever. But as with a global pandemic, we can actually be global journalists when we do stories that connect with people. So I would urge those of you who are a bit younger, more flexible, not, you know, in Kiswahili they say, samaki mkunje angali mbichi. Julius and I'll try to explain what that means. Leon, how do you translate that in English?
Yeah.
Bring up a child.
Yeah.
Bring up a child.
Yeah, exactly. Bring up a child in the way he should go.
Strike the iron while it's hot.
Or strike the iron. No, not strike the iron while it's hot. It's because you're young, you're more moldable. So the young journalists should change what we have always felt journalism is. So not top down, but really going to the grassroots, and then building a global community with the stories that are available today. You know, stories about Kenya that will connect somebody in Asia. So I think there's an opportunity to really get into the global space.
Yes, and Madam Chebet, there's a question on YouTube. There's a question on YouTube for you from Miss Linda Mbaisi, and she asks that much of what she's seen, there are some journalists who pick stories from social media, then they run to publish them. Those stories now, unfortunately, some of them end up being fake. So she's asking, do journalists actually fact check and verify? Because that contributes to the spreading of fake news. So she would like to get your reaction on that.
All right, I'll just make it short because Catherine had alluded to it earlier, and I think Julius as well on the fake news, and it's going back to fact checking and asking who's the watchdog in this newsroom. By the time a story is going on air, whether it is on TV or whether it's print, whether it's social media, who does the buck stop with? So yes, I know that some journalists will pick a story from social media spaces, and I don't think it's a bad thing, because it's the social media is also the news source, but there has to be a lot of verification. Who's the source of information? Have you verified who this person is in the first place? And if it's a website, as Julius alluded to it, is it a legitimate website? Is it has it been there for a long time? Is there background information? So it's going back to the basics, as I mentioned earlier, and just integrity and for lack of a better word, just the basics of journalism.
Okay.
I wanted to choose to come in.
Yes, Mr. Julius.
I'm glad to meet you, Mr. Journalist, because.
Hello, Mr. Julius, are you there?
You can hear me?
Yes, right now we can hear you. Yes.
Yeah. So I was saying, glad to meet Tibet, said. So you said something very important. Business journalists really tend to feel like really,
Please
but
fix your sound, Mr. Julius. Please fix your sound. Fix your sound for us. Yes.
You can't hear me?
We can.
Now we can hear you well.
Yeah. So I was saying, Terran just said, as business journalists, we tend to think that we are really smart, we are up there, so we don't tend to connect with ordinary people who are there. But in real sense, the idea of being a journalist, let's just not talk even about a business journalist, is to communicate in a way that everybody understands the language you're talking about. Because the moment you don't have that feature or that aspect in what you're doing, it means that you're not a journalist. Either you're something else, you're pretending to be a journalist. So, and it is true, whether here in Rwanda, most of the people who call themselves business journalists, people who think they're smart, only deal with the central bank governors, the economies. So you rarely see them on ground. But to be honest, in times like this, where you have, I alluded to it earlier when we were starting the conversation, the global recession, for instance, when you look at it, a few years ago, the world was not as connected as we are. Today, when the IMF just recently announced that the world had entered global recession, there was a lot of stories that were coming out, but few of them really talked about how is this really likely to affect the local people. For instance, if you're in Kenya, how is it going to affect you? I don't know, you call them mamambogas, for instance. How is this likely to affect them? So a good business journalist is supposed to go down there, talk to people. If you have Rwanda, which is a small landlocked country, really connected to Kenya through Mombasa or Tanzania through Dar es Salaam ports, it means that if the global recession is hitting, if goods are coming from China, for instance, shipping lines are going to stop, Mombasa is not going to do business, our exporters and our people who are in business are not going to do business. So such a thing is going to affect people in A, B, C, D. You're not going to get goods to deliver goods to the markets at the right time, for instance. People are likely not going to get goods, either essential goods. Even if you talk about food, people are not going to get food because of something that happened in China, but is affecting Kenya and it's affecting Rwanda. At the end of the day, the kind of analysis that we're supposed to be doing is around, trying to break down this complex chain of doing business in a language that an ordinary citizen really understands. And I think it's the basics, like Chebet said, it's just the basics that we need to go back to. We say we're reporting to people. We're not reporting to central bank governors. We're not reporting to economists. So in a period like this, really, that's what we ought to do. And I think that's what I always try to do, in my stories, much as, I do some of the complex stories about economics, and how the business is doing. I also try to break it down, to the people to really understand what exactly does this mean? Why should I care if I'm selling my vegetables out there, why should I care about this? Why should I read it? So really, it's exactly the same thing that really journalists have to do in this period. And then for safety, safety, I like to say a safety of a journalist is as important as the safety of any other citizen, because a journalist is a citizen, really. If the government says put on mask or use hand sanitizer, who are you to say you're not going to use it? If you're going to look for a story at a market, for instance, you're trying to analyze the prices of products at the markets, you're going around the markets, make sure you really abide by the measures that other people are abiding by. It's simple as that. And the good thing right now, most of the things are happening virtually. Maybe this conversation we're having today, Leon might have organized it to be held in Kenya, but today we're having it here on Zoom and YouTube. So we need to leverage all these platforms. There's quite a lot of endless possibilities that journalists can put on, and they still do the work. They give people the right information. And one other perspective I wanted to bring in is really avoid sensationalist, reporting, because it's very bad. I could tell you the journalists who receive more threats than others are sensationalist journalists right now, because you talk about for instance, supermarkets which have gone the shelves that have gone empty. Such a thing is going to really fuel, for instance, panic buying, which is not good. How do you make sure that you tell people, if instead of reporting in a way that is really alarming to people, say, oh, the economy is shutting down, oh, everyone is going to die, why don't you tell people what exactly should people be doing if this is happening? Because that is exactly what people need. Those are the kind of stories that people need in this kind of crisis. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you very much. And I've seen we've knocked out 2 full hours there. Just to wind up, I wish that each of you take just a last lap and tell us what your closing thoughts are. Let's start with you, Madam Alicia.
Thank you so much. And then I really enjoyed the talk. There are 2 main things that I want to address at the end. One is about the responsibility of a journalist and the media industry. I want to respond earlier to Jennifer about because I'm from Taiwan, and we have a very vibrant democracy and the press of freedom. However, the situation in China is really different because they have a limited press of freedom and a speech. The government heavily control the informations that the people can get. And then that's very crucial because that affects directly to the people's safety and life on the ground. So that at the right the media outlets there can't really cover the issues at the right moment. So the information actually can't spread to other places, and that cause to some extent the global pandemic, and then many people die because of this. And then the other things I hope to bring out is like I hope we all learn from these lessons that we should reconsider that the topics of discrimination, division, hatred, and exclusion, because we can see that there is actually the constructural discrimination that people think Asia actually bring up a virus, or actually the people targeting the Chinese people, but actually the Chinese people are the first ones who are suffered and then affected by this. And also now you can see the other way around, because I also heard from my friends, she's British and she traveled in Africa and people call her Corona. So you can see that that this kind of things like continually happening, and this is a pre-existing problem. It's not like because of the outbreak and then people feel panic and then start doing this. It's actually that kind of discrimination and hatred already exists underlying. So I hope that as a journalist or who care about these people as a global citizens, we can see that what we can do in our piece and coverage to actually create more solidarity or to reduce more discrimination. For example, when I want to share this piece, and then the one question I ask is that if this actually will create more hatred, or this will actually create more divisions in the society, I think it's crucial to recognize that we can. I hope that the world can learn from this instead of moving back and then to deepen that divisions, because as what we see, everybody's are affected by this, and everybody's are some sort of victims of this. So yeah, I think it's important to highlight that after this outbreak, can we learn more from this, and then can we rethink what group needs more care, and then what we can do to work on things together.
Thank you so much. And just to summarize, for those who are watching, what she has said, if I would use one word, that word will be empathy. That we as journalists must remember to be very empathetic now more than ever. Okay, let us go to Madam Catherine. Madam Catherine, are you with us? Hello, Jennifer, is Madam Catherine with us?
My audio, I don't know if you can hear me, but
Yes,
I'm having serious challenges with the
We
audio.
can hear you, Catherine. You can go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, we've lost her again now.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go on.
Yes.
I don't know, then let me not say much. Probably just to summarize, I would go back to what we have reiterated before, that fact checking is important. At this time, it is important for journalists to use credible sources, especially health experts. Let them tell the stories. It is important for the journalists to, of course, when you fact check, then it is important to debunk. It is important and then I would want to probably bring up the issue of specializing. You know, I think it is important at this time that especially training institutions, media training institutions looked into it, that we need to have journalists train in specific areas so that we have journalists who are able to tell stories effectively. For example, about children, you know, health issues, education, environment, and so on. I think this is very important. This has been overlooked, yet so important. Only that way then are we able to tell these stories the way they are supposed to be told, package them properly. And also, as Terian said, let's try to humanize these stories. That I think should really cover the issue of empathy. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Julius? Mr. Julius, are you with us?
He's muted. Unmute yourself, Julius.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
So my conclusion would be we are dealing with a crisis that has affected everyone, including the journalists themselves. I do moderate events. I travel around the world to correct stories, but I could tell you all that has stopped because of the virus. So nobody is spared. The only job we have to do right now is to fight the virus. And as journalists, our single most role is to give the right information to people. Much as we rely on politicians to, get the right information, it's now the time to really rely on scientists rely on doctors, rely on medical experts and specialists. Really go out there and give them platforms to explain complex things like, social distancing, flattening the curve, all of these things. We've had politicians so many times on our television stations, in our newspapers, in our radio stations. It's, we really, really need to give decent platforms to politicians, to scientists, to doctors, to medical specialists who really understand these things more than others. And we really need to speak the language that everyone understands and really try to avoid, you know, using the language that make people really panic, because the anxiety is already out there. How do you make sure that now people really get the information that do not really make them panic, but let them feel like there's hope for tomorrow?
Thank you very much. Madam Tirian? Madam Tirian with us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
All right, I'm sorry, my phone went off, so I just ran back to get my laptop. I guess just as a final thoughts from me, first of all, this is a time to redefine what journalism is, and to redefine what journalism is in this time. So, I've practiced journalism for 15 years, but never have I been in a position where a global pandemic is actually something that we're reporting on a day-to-day. So that's one. And for journalists to see where the opportunities are in terms of growth, how do I begin to learn? Because for the first time now, we have to learn about so many different countries and what's happening in those spaces. Usually in different newsrooms, you'd have a journalist who is, the health journalists, for instance. But at this point in time, all of us are, health journalists. All of us are, reporting on the same pandemic, whether it's from an economic impact perspective or geopolitical perspective, which is something that we really have to look at as well, or whether it's from a socio-economic perspective as well. So it's really a time for us to be retrospective to see, where does this take us? Where does this take me as a journalist? And what do I need to equip myself with to be able to be relevant in the new newsroom, so to speak. One other point is a responsibility as journalists. And in as much as sensationalism sells, and unfortunately we have, with the advent of social media and cheap bandwidth, have come to a place where whoever gets it fast, whoever writes the most sensational headline is the one who steals the day. So for us, it is a time to really go back to the basics and be responsible. Third and last point is, it's, with the social media space, traditional media had gotten to a very shaky position. But what we have seen now is that, for factual news, everybody's still going home to look at the news, to see what the media channels are saying on Twitter, on Facebook. So in as much as, yes, the content creators are many, but the thought leadership seems to be going back to the traditional media from a believability and a trust point of view. So for us as media houses, it's a time to reposition ourselves and really, one, take charge, two, be responsible, and three, go back to the basics. Why are we a broadcast house? Why are we journalists? It's to be factual, it's to be the watchdog, it's to be the basics of what journalism is, and to avoid all that, will I get more eyeballs when I write this story? Will I get more clicks when I do this? And unfortunately, as broadcast houses, that's where we've gotten to. But now we must really go down to the basics.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Madam Jennifer, the floor is yours.
I just want to end and saying that know that whatever you're going to put online is not impacting you, it's impacting generations, you know. Being true or not true, just put yourself in the shoes of the person who is going to read that story. As you put it out there, what impact are you want? Do you want, as Terian said, do you want more clicks? So what? After the clicks, as someone said, it was something funny, but it's true. You might get the clicks and then tomorrow you got the coronavirus and you die, and the money that you thought you're going to get from the clicks you don't get. But in that process, you've already harmed so many people. So before you put out a story, think about the person who's going to read that story. What is the impact that you want to see? What is the so what? Yes, I'm doing this story, the so what of the story. And let us do research. You know, let's not rely on what we read. You know, look for, if that story is not in any credible news outlet, do not publish it, do not retweet it, just read it and then reread it and then go do a little research, give it your own angle before you put it out there. Even if it's government, now government is giving data, look at that data from an analytical point of view and say, what does it mean to my audience? And do a little bit research and give it the content that is required for your audience. Thank you so much, Leon.
Okay. From me, I just wish to appreciate each and every one of you who has been streaming in, plus the panel, for sparing your time. I don't take it for granted. We don't take it for granted. And this is just the beginning, because next Saturday, same time, same place, we shall be having another panel, another topic. I figured out as a young journalist, actually in my final semester and coming into the field, that perhaps maybe while we are quarantined at home like this, instead of spending time on Instagram and other places, perhaps we could invite our senior journalists and our senior mentors and perhaps take notes from them and learn something, because they're at home too. So it's a win-win situation. I just really wish to thank Madam Jennifer also for the opportunity to do this and for the support that you've accorded it. It was such a short notice, but I look forward to seeing each and every one of you moving forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Leon. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys. It was a pleasure meeting. It was a pleasure meeting you.
Thank you, Julius. You can go back to sleep now.
I know.
Yeah.
I think you can go back now.
Madam Terry, thank you so much. Madam Catherine, thank you.